profession on to emerging technology with structure and intention and strategy, especially when it comes to AI. So on the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about actuarial work and sort of the evolving roles. So Patrick, if you could go to the next slide. When we talk about AI, it's often framed as magic, something that's opaque or mysterious, something we don't really know what it is, but really it's tools, right? It's not magic, it's tools. So what AI may be for us is tools that help us work faster, tools that help us ask better questions, and tools that help us validate assumptions. And I think that's really important because that's where actuaries are very uniquely prepared to lead us. It's not about replacing what we do. It's really about making the work that actuaries have always done, sort of pulling it into a different context. So the work around logic and rigor and accountability, all those things are still there. But what AI has the opportunity to help us do is rethink how we're applying that in our expertise here. So the next slide, Patrick, is disruption, shifting foundations. So you can see this actuary in a beach chair reading his mortality tables with a big new wave of AI coming behind him. We are really starting to see these foundational shifts. AI is really starting to change already. We can see at SOA how we're modeling mortality, how we're evaluating longevity, even how we price risk and make decisions. So we're starting to see it in product design, in customer interactions, and in operational workflows. So, the work feels familiar until it isn't. So that wave is sort of coming, and actuaries, what we're working on is really turning around and engaging in what's behind us as actuaries. I'm speaking as an actuary because I'm around them so much. Just to name it, I am not an actuary, but I do work with actuaries a lot and represent the profession. So I don't mean to mislead anybody as if I am an actuary. So on the next slide, and this, just to name it, is my favorite visual in the deck. It's the Mr. Potato Head visual. So this is about real world signals, right? So AI's impact is not vague. It's visible in some really specific real world use cases. And I know Frank's going to name some in a little bit more detail when he speaks. But some of the ones that we're seeing include mortality modeling. So the machine learning methods that we can use in mortality modeling, like gradient boosting and neural nets, are starting to outperform some of our traditional models when they're fed real-time or multidimensional data. In underwriting, AI has made it possible to price life insurance for individual cancer survivors by modeling survival risk based on personalized treatment and diagnostic information. And then in data quality, AI is being used to detect and correct errors in cause of death sequences on certificates, and it's improving the accuracy of our national mortality data, which is pretty incredible. And then even on the workflow side, a lot of early career actuaries are already using AI assistants like Copilot and ChatGPT to automate data prep and write code and draft reports and things like that. So this image of Mr. Potato Head that is absolutely my favorite is more accurate than it looks. And also don't look too carefully at the image because some of the little pieces are a little bit creepy. Thank you, AI, for your generation of creepy pictures. So it is more accurate than it looks. We're not losing the role of actuaries. We're just sort of reassembling what it is to be an actuary. Those same pieces are still there. They're just starting to be configured in new ways. So the next slide is more about SOA's coordinated response to this. So we've developed a coordinated strategy, and our goal is to ensure that the profession evolves in step with AI and not after it. So our first guiding principle as SOA is really about co-creating the future. There is no way that Society of Actuaries alone are going to be the ones to create the future for actuaries. So it is really about partnering with NAWA and others, all of our different groups, with NIST, the IAA, MIT, LIMRA, others. I'm naming sort of a smattering of them, but we formed an AI reference group to work with groups like that to really try to define how credentialing and continuing education and governance all need to shift. So that's really the first part of what we're doing. We're also really focused on equipping actuaries. So we've added 7 AI-focused learning tracks to PD Edge, which is our professional development platform. And we're working on building more flexible and skill-based credentialing pathways, which will really allow us to integrate AI in as we need to. And then finally, we're also operationalizing internally. So we have 100% of SOA staff have done responsible AI use training, and we've rolled out a whole variety of internal tools that we're using. We have about 85% of our staff using ChatGPT on a regular weekly basis and 65% using Copilot. So we're really active users and really engaging in this every day. Our development teams are using Cursor, all kinds of different internal tools. So we're really trying to stay ahead and really know what's going on and how we can integrate these things as well. So this image is meant to be a disciplined ballet, and that really reflects kind of what we're aiming for, that it's movement, it's coordination, and it's also precision all at once. So it is really a dance. So my next slide, this one's actually, I have it labeled strategy coordinated response again. Sorry, that is my mistake. This one's about leadership. So leadership and having disciplined influence in our approach here. So, you know, if we think about what leadership looks like in an AI-driven world, I think it starts with judgment. You know, AI can suggest things, but really humans need to be interpreting them. We still need to assess what's missing, what's reasonable, and what's at stake. So, you know, there are places in the world where you don't have to be quite as precise, but for actuaries, we really can't afford AI slop. We need really disciplined thinking, and that's a really, really important part of what we're doing. It also means governance for us. So it is incredibly important to keep model validation front and center, even when using, you know, black box tools. And who better to explain black box tools with really complex models than actuaries? And it also really, and I'm foreshadowing a little bit what Dorothy is going to talk about, but it really requires ethical clarity as well. So that is very last but not least on this, that AI affects who gets access, what they pay, and how fairness is defined. So the actuarial profession has always operated with long-term accountability in mind, and we really need that mindset now more than ever with AI. So that tightrope image captures kind of the balance of careful, steady, and very human. And this final slide should be future leading with purpose instead of leadership. So sorry, that was my mistake on my slide. These are brand new slides for you also. Made that mistake, but there's no single path ahead for actuaries with AI. There is a direction. I think our strength has never come from certainty. It's really, you know, where actuaries shine is in engaging with uncertainty. We're systematic and ethical, and we approach it with clarity and care. So, you know, at SOA, we think that if we lead with purpose, we can really, actuaries can help shape systems that are explainable and accurate and aligned with what people actually need. So while AI itself is artificial or maybe artificial, trust, judgment, and integrity are all still human things, and those are really ours to carry forward. So that's what I have to share with you, and happy to hand it over to Dorothy next. Dorothy is incredible, and she's going to talk to you about ethical and responsible use and the regulatory side of this. Thank you all.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Alice, for that gracious handoff. I do also want to add about myself that I do teach human cognition at UNC Charlotte. I am a psychologist. My PhD is in media psychology. And we're doing a lot of research on how AI is impacting the brain. So there's a lot to talk about there. And I do like Alice's point of, like, the best AI is going to be AI that is human-centered. So we're going to have to get back to those conversations very soon. But I really want to thank NAWA for having me at this really prestigious event. I'm going to talk about several ASOPs that are relevant to AI modeling by discussing their purpose and highlighting some particularly relevant sections. And I'll end by talking about some governance frameworks that are evolving to provide guidance to insurers and actuaries working with AI. Next slide. Okay, so the ASOP 12, this standard provides guidance to actuaries when performing actuarial services with respect to risk classification, and it applies to all practice areas. It applies to actuaries when performing actuarial services with respect to designing, developing, selecting, modifying, reviewing, evaluating, or opining on any element of a risk classification framework in connection with financial or personal security systems. It also applies to actuaries when performing actuarial services with respect to using any elements of a risk classification framework in the same connection, and to the extent practical and consistent with the scope of the actuary's assignment. So I really want to point out the importance of this ASOP because it explicitly states that there should be a relationship between risk characteristics and expected outcomes. However, it stops short of suggesting there be a causal relationship, but at a minimum demonstrating correlation is important. The NAIC white paper on the regulatory review of predictive models developed in 2020 discusses a rational explanation should explain the relationship between risk characteristics and outcome variables. It also refers to a plausible narrative connecting the variable and/or treatment in question with real-world circumstances or behaviors that contribute to the risk of insurance loss in a manner that's easily understandable to a consumer or educated layperson. This language is especially important because regulators are often confronted by consumers about insurance products and what's happened and why their insurance is so high. And regulators definitely need to understand what's going on in actuarial models. Next slide. So the purpose of this ASOP is really to provide guidance to actuaries when performing actuarial services involving data. And it provides guidance when selecting data, performing a review of the data, using the data, relying on data supplied by others, preparing data for use by others, making appropriate disclosures with regarding data quality as well. It is not explicit that actuaries audit data, but best practices would suggest you would want to make sure you're comfortable with the quality of the data before using it. And we know data quality is coming under more and more regulatory scrutiny, especially with the NAIC third-party models and data working group that are looking at how we might best, how regulators might best regulate the use of some of that data. Also, if you haven't read the American Academies of Actuaries issue brief on big data, I highly recommend that you read that as well. And it's interesting because it does go through all the various definitions that the Academy has used over the years. So it's kind of interesting to see how the definition under the Academy has of data under the Academy has changed. And that brief is titled Defining Big Data. So I think that's a very worthwhile read. Next slide. So the purpose of this ASOP is to provide guidance to actuaries back up, back to 41. One more. There you go. Okay. Issuing actuarial communications within any practice area. This standard does not apply to communications that don't include an actuarial opinion or actuarial findings, such as brochures, fees, or invoices. The actuary should state the actuarial findings and identify the methods, procedures, assumptions, and data used by the actuary with sufficient quality such that another qualified actuary reviewing that work should be able to reasonably replicate what they're doing or certainly understand it. Next slide. So ASOP 56, this is a really important ASOP when it comes to modeling. And it provides guidance to actuaries when they're performing services with respect to designing, developing, selecting, modifying, using, reviewing, or evaluating models. And it applies to actuaries in any practice area when performing these services with respect to designing, selecting, modifying, and using all types of models. So for example, an actuary using a model developed by others in which the actuary is responsible for the model output is subject to this standard. In my role, my team is seeing more and more modeling teams being made up of just data scientists building actuarial models. Now, some might think this is a troubling trend because we know that data scientists don't have the professional code of standards or conduct or standards of practice that actuaries do. There's no ABCD equivalent organization for data scientists. However, we do see data scientists availing the ASOPs when they are submitting models for approval. What's interesting, we often get really long discussions of every sentence in an ASOP being really discussed in quite detail by some of these teams. So it's quite impressive what some of these teams are doing. And they're often even more detailed than what we see actuaries submitting for approval. So, next slide. So theory and policy is one thing while practice is another. One thing that is not well understood, especially by practitioners, is that the regulators are not bound to the ASOPs. Sometimes we see companies not answering specific regulator questions given the reason that per ASOP such and such, I've complied with this request. You know, the ASOPs really are guidance for behavior and they're not justification for unresponsiveness. And this is where I think the profession can get in trouble. So when we see these filing teams, these teams, rate model teams filing responses like that, it really does kind of incense the regulators a little bit because, again, the regulators are bound by law and, you know, the ASOPs are not in those laws. So data scientists are trying to adhere to the ASOPs when presenting files for regulatory approval, as I previously said, and it is pretty interesting to see how they are really trying to dig in and demonstrate that their models are in compliance with regulatory standards. So I want to also talk about two aspects of the filings that are getting more attention, and that's the use of third-party data and modeling disclosures. Third-party data, it's not currently regulated, and there's lots of concerns about its credibility. And I think many of you, if you're following the NAIC meetings, know that regulators are trying to come up with some type of framework for assessing the soundness of third-party data and models. One thing that companies can do when submitting filings is to provide really strong examples that demonstrate, you know, how their models work and what they've done to assure that their data is free of bias. That is like one sure way of helping to get a much faster approval. Next slide. So the Academy's latest discussion paper examines some professional considerations using generative AI. And I think this is also a really, really worthwhile read. Next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the existing AI governance frameworks other organizations have developed. Next slide. Sorry, I'm talking a little fast because I only have 12 minutes. So the NAIC, it really began its focus on governing AI in 2020 with the development of its AI principles known as FACTS. F, fair and ethical use. A, accountability. C, compliance with state laws and regulations. T, transparency. And S for safe, secure, fair, and robust systems. Next slide. And then in December 2023, they adopted the NAIC Model Bulletin. And this bulletin, it really serves as a reminder to insurers of their need to comply with the laws and regulations. It provides a principle-based, not prescriptive-based regulatory framework for governing the use of AI. And it outlines the documentation insurers should be maintaining on their use of AI. Next slide. Next slide. Oh, back up. There you go. Okay. And so the bulletin for, I don't know, I think it's only maybe 15 or pages or so. It's really dense, excuse me, with a lot of information. And it covers these topic areas, but things are still evolving, especially with the use of third-party data, as well as the NEIC contemplating an AI model law. So stay tuned to the developments of each committee. Next slide. Okay, so the International Actuarial Association, they've been working on an AI governance framework for actuaries, which I have been working on. And the purpose of the framework really shares a lot of the themes of other frameworks you've seen. And so this is really supposed to be educational material to help actuaries to really use AI responsibly and to raise awareness of the risks that need to be managed when designing, developing, and implementing AI systems. And I want to note that the NEIC bulletin really did influence a lot of this framework as well, which is a credit to the US regulators that worked on this. Next slide. So the framework consists of 10 key components, and it discusses important elements of governance over the AI lifecycle. Another important element of the framework is education, and it stresses that no one in the organization, I'm almost done, should be left out from the top of the house to the first rungs of the organization, and especially those on the first rungs, because they're often using these dashboard systems that are AI based, and they have no idea what's going on behind the black box. So they also need to be educated so that they can recognize when the AI is going off the rails, and empowered to hit the pause button so they can get some oversight and someone to come in and look at the results before letting the AI continue along its track. So that I think is the really important aspect of education, because there have been lots of documented cases where when you get to the implementation stage, it's like a set it and forget it approach. Once it's been designed and put in production, all the brainiacs, they go on to do something else, and we've got people on the front lines using these systems, and they have no idea why it's producing the results it's producing, and therefore they can't figure out like whether or not they should raise their hand and say, can we stop this thing? So, with that, I'm sorry that was a little rushed, but with that, I will now hand it off to Frank to talk about some practical applications of AI.
All right, thanks. I gotta wait for Patrick to give me a share.
I think you should be able to request it, Frank. Are you good?
It says the host isn't allowing multiple presenters sharing, so I guess someone needs to stop sharing.
Let me
Thank
stop
you.
sharing and let you go, Frank.
Okay, I'm off to the races because I think we're a bit behind. So this is a presentation I've given a few times. I'm going to give you a abbreviated version. It's 45 minutes, so I cut a bunch of agenda items out to show you just the highlights. I want to give you some tools and tricks first, and I'll talk about like one or two pitfalls and interesting areas for actuaries to play. The first category of these tools and tricks are for productivity. So the first category of things I want to talk about are AI browsers. So you may think, I already got like ChatGPT. I kind of know what AI is. Why the heck do I need a browser that's got AI? Why do we need a browser with a brain? There's quite a few of these out there right now. I've highlighted Gemini and Perplexity's Comet, as well as Opera, which has Aria. And if it's a tool you think you don't need, I'll show you how I used it. So recently I went to China for a CES summit in August, and I got a whole bunch of dates and times on my email from our staff actuary over there. And I don't remember if I put all those things on my calendar. This is Microsoft Edge, and I think a lot of people are in the Microsoft environment, so I chose this particular example. And Microsoft Edge, the browser has Copilot built in. So I opened up Copilot and I said, hey, can you look at my mail browser, which is right here, and see if all the events mentioned in the mail is already on my calendar. And this was just a test, and it worked perfectly well. It said, look, I looked at your calendar. Looks like this one's not found, this happy hour thing. There's an annual summit. You've got some other all-day hold there, but this is the actual time. And then I went on and said, just put the right holds onto my calendar, and it can edit it for my, just for me. So for those of you who don't have an executive assistant or who need, extra help remembering things and putting things on calendars, these AI browsers are quite useful. And there are other use cases that you can come up with if you're able to chat and interact with your browser tabs. The next is vibe coding. Okay, so vibe coding just basically says you turn natural language into code. This is similar to what Alice did earlier, where she took natural language and turned into a picture. There's a lot of apps out there. Replic's one of these. I know that Replit was, it's been in the news lately, but it has been used at our high school, at Oakland Tech High School Computer Academy. The students there actually use Replit to write little apps. I'll show you a bit of how this goes. So I recorded myself playing with Figma, which is another one of these vibe coders. And you could just Google and there's like tons that'll come up. Figma's great because Figma used to be used by designers for designing an app, and they just draw out what the app would look like. Here, I just typed in a paragraph, which was at the very beginning. Write me a motor insurance quoter that's catchy. It's a front end. Go research some of the Singapore insurers. I was giving this in Singapore. Tell me how they rate insurance and build a rater that is viable. So it went through, it created something, found all the errors, debugged it, and now I'm clicking through to see what the functionality is. The other thing is if I clicked over here where it says code, it would spit out all the React.js code that it just generated from my one paragraph. It took me a minute to write the paragraph. It took it 5 minutes to generate the code. And you can see you've got a fully functional rater here, which might cost you anywhere between 50,000 and 100,000 of engineering consulting hours to produce. This thing fits on iPhone, it fits on Android, it fits on tablets, webs, everything. It's React.js, and I have the entire backend for me to just add plumbing to. I did see in the chat, sorry, a question about how can AI help actuaries catch up to data scientists. I would say this can help actuaries catch up not only to data scientists, but software engineers as well, because now you don't need someone to write the front end. You could just do this, debug it, and plug it into data. Okay, pitfalls. Actually, I had one more thing I wanted to show you. Notebook LM was my other tip or trick. Let me make sure that I'm sharing sound. I think I am. Let's just do this real quick. Okay, so I took all of the CS Exam 5 readings. I put it into this thing in Notebook LM. It's a Google product. Why I want to show you this is there's two reasons. One, it's completely closed. Whereas all the other stuff where you enter a prompt, it may use that to like train other things like ChatGPT, etc. Notebook LM is closed. And whatever you put into it, it's in your Notebook LM instance. It just stays right there. Unless I click share and give it to anyone else, no one sees this. It doesn't get trained in any other model. Number two, this is what, like, you want to know all the kids are up to, right? This is what all the university students are using to study, right? They get these syllabus, they get these books, they interact with it. So this thing can produce summaries, it can produce study material, it can produce flashcards, you name it. It can produce a podcast. So I want to play it.
Hey there, welcome back in the deep dive. We've got quite a stack of sources in front of us today, and we're ready to plunge into how something essential but maybe a bit opaque actually works.
Yeah, it's a fascinating area.
Today we're diving deep into the world of insurance. Specifically, we're peeling back the curtain on how actuaries, well, how they predict an uncertain future, figuring out what prices to charge and how much money companies really need to set aside for future claims.
It's definitely a complex puzzle. It brings together
you can click join.
Rigorous math, statistics.
Oh, hey there. How can we
I
help?
got a question about increased limit factors. Why do we trend losses before computing ILFs? Thanks.
That is a fantastic, highly technical question, and it really gets right to the heart of advanced rate making.
Yeah, that's exactly the kind of deep dive we love.
So the short answer is that loss trends have a leveraged effect on those higher layers of coverage.
Okay, let's unpack that leveraged effect a little since we were planning to talk about increased limits later.
We absolutely should. When we talk about increased limits factors, or ILFs, we are pricing the coverage above a certain basic level.
Right, the really large losses that hit those higher policy limits.
Precisely. If we didn't trend the historical losses first, we'd be analyzing claim costs from the past.
Costs that were lower due to inflation and other factors.
Exactly. And because a general severity trend, say 10% is dampened for losses at the basic limit, it is magnified for the excess or increased limits losses.
I remember.
Okay, that's probably enough. It's quite impressive. And I've been testing it out as a study tool. All right, finally, Cursor's problem. This is very interesting. So Chris Pike, who is famous in the venture capital world, wrote a position paper. And as always, he puts this in a Google Doc that is completely open to the public. And he says there's this problem with Cursor. So Cursor does provide vibe coding. It's one of the better ones out there. Claude Code is pretty good as well. And now I think Replit, the one I showed earlier, has something called Codex. But what these vibe coders do is they allow users to pay a certain amount, and then they get to play with the vibe coding, and things come out of it. But they need a backend. They need like an AI model to provide them things, and they pay a variable cost. So the issue is you've got a fixed revenue because all your users are paying the vibe coding provider a monthly fee. And then you've got variable costs because you don't know if the person's just going to play around with it, maybe like Alice does one presentation, I've created one app, or if it's some crazy dude who's sitting there like going crazy and putting hundreds of apps out just using this fixed setup. So he mentions that insurance companies are the canonical example. They employ actuaries. I love it when our profession is mentioned in the news. Actuaries accurately price risks and segment users. And they talk about actuarial discipline being necessary for this to survive. So AI actually needs actuaries to help them with some of their pricing and their modeling. What's very interesting, he goes on to say, I didn't put this on the screen, is it's not clear if all the AI growth right now is because people are getting a real good deal, right? They actually have a high cost and they only stay with you because you're not pricing them for their variable usage. So it's not clear how much of that hyper growth is because it's a really good deal, or is it because everyone wants to learn AI because they're afraid that that's the future and they're missing out. So I thought that was interesting. There's other applications of actuaries as well in the news. There's like AI insurance, which is totally interesting as well. One last slide I wanted to show is how to get involved, how to learn, there we go, how to get more engaged. So I think that you should try out some of these tools. So I've talked about the AI browser. I talked about vibe coding. Try it yourself. The vibe coding's free. I signed up for Figma for free. So you might be able to find that in a few places. The CSAI Fast Track, I think, is not out anymore, but they do have a recording, so I think you can go for that. There's an AI agents course, which is really good out there. The IAA AI Task Force partnered with the IAA DAVF, and there is a webinar that I can send out on AI agents that two actuaries in Zurich in Australia put together to show how agents can be used in insurance. And then finally, you can join AIforactuaries.org. This is a website dedicated for actuaries to talk about AI. And then how I keep up, I listen to the AI Daily Brief. It's a podcast. You can get all the news in about 5 minutes, and they do a deep dive. That's another 15. And then you can subscribe to something called the Neuron. And they're both very, very interesting, and they do keep you up to date quite well. So that's it.
That's really interesting. I love how the podcast example even compliments you. Added bonus. It was like, great question, Frank. But awesome. So thank you to our three presenters for sharing such thoughtful insights. We're going to transition into the Q&A section of our discussion. This will go till about 3:59, so we do have a decent amount of time for questions. And we'd love to hear from you, our audience. So I've seen a couple questions come in through the chat. We'll start with those, but please submit them as we're talking if you haven't already, and we'll do our best to get through as many as we can. So to kick us off, I think I will start with a question to you, Dorothy. I saw two questions that came in through the chat that I think would probably be best for you. One was a question about clarification of whether regulatory filings require an actuary's signature. And then perhaps you can segue from that into the other question being a comment about like, how do you balance the benefits of the AI use with environmental impacts from an ethical and responsible perspective? And Dorothy, you're on mute.
John's on the call as well. I think there are some communications that do require an actuary signature for regulatory purposes. You still there, John? Since he was a regulator.
I'm here, but you were
I think
making
I'm
a
a
point.
regulator, but I'm not a regulator. I'm just regulatory staff. So the question about I think there are some things that require an actuary signature, but since John was a regulator in Minnesota, what's your take, John, and your state in your state?
No, I asked the question because you mentioned that, you mentioned that the data scientists were presenting these what sounded like filings, and I just wondered whether an actuary didn't need to sign them.
Yeah, we don't often see actuaries, like, for example, if it's a third-party model, we can see teams that don't have actuaries on them. And they're usually seeking to get approval so that they can sell their models to companies saying, oh, we now have regulatory approval for this. But it depends on what kind of model it is. There are like some of the computer vision models that we see. There are no actuaries on those teams, and they're looking for approval in different states. It's up to the companies to integrate that output into their rating plans. So
okay, so I think my mistake was that these are not product filings in the sort of typical sense.
correct. Yes. Some of them are.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. And I like the second question too. I was wondering if I could share my screen a minute to answer the second question.
You should be good to go,
Yes.
Dorothy.
Yep.
Okay. So, because we talk about the benefits of and some of the challenges, and so one of the things that I'm very much interested in is kind of the impacts of these data centers that are the backbone for like generative AI. And so just this past week, I got a news report that they want to build a data center like in the town right next to me. And there's like a lot of concern among neighbors for the amount of pollution, the water quality, the energy consumption. And now people are looking at some of the health risks associated with these data centers. So there is a cost to data centers. And I got interested in this because I was working, I'm with a group that looks at AI every week. And one person in the group was talking about how much it costs to subscribe to Gemini or some of these other services. And I just thought no one's talking about like what the impact is of this on communities. And so I started digging into this, and now we have a group at the Academy who are working on a paper to really outline some of these risks to communities. And you often find them in communities where they're low-income communities, water-stressed communities. People are not empowered to really fight the deployment of some of these data centers. And these things can cover hundreds of acres. I think Elon Musk is opening one near down in Memphis, and there was a lot of community uproar over that. And so just like Google and see where, or ask ChatGPT or whatever whoever you want to, whatever service you want to subscribe to, like where is a data center? What's the closest data center to where you live? And then think about some of those issues. I think we have to start thinking, okay, what is the limit? Like how much bigger? Because now we used to talk about data centers in terms of megawatts. Now we're talking about them in terms of gigawatts. I mean, how much bigger and I know I'm always like the negative. I always have the negative aspect of some of this stuff, but how much more of this stuff do we need? I mean, it's kind of concerning to me. So, yeah, that's sort of my feeling about data centers and the impact. I know there's some good aspects. Like I thought Alice's presentation was amazing. I loved and again, I think if we can keep it human-centered, we can avoid a lot of some of these problems with it getting out of control.
Frank, did you want to add
You wanna say-
anything?
Yeah, I want to add something. I think all that is fair. I think that there are really disproportionate impacts. I think that the Memphis thing I thought of, so I posted it right as Dorothy was talking about it because our minds went to the same place. I do want to paint a bit of an optimistic future because one of the things that is happening outside of this is that folks are realizing there's not enough power, not enough clean power. So there's a lot of work on fusion. And I can sum it up so we can get to other questions, but it's like this. There's no way we can power all of the AI unless we actually have something as clean as fusion out there. So AI actually needs fusion. If you look at some of the power output of the things that OpenAI is buying and whatnot. But the other is also true. There's actually quite a lot of fusion research that is powered by AI. They're using AI to model different chemical reactions, different physics, design different plasma and other things where the fusion could happen. And ton of money is actually going into that. And so we might actually, as a result of all this struggle, get clean energy for everyone because fusion is going to be enough to power everyone. But that's an optimistic view. In the short term, it's going to be painful. It's going to feel unfair, and there's going to be some real impact that we need to reconcile with. But maybe they'll find fusion fast sooner rather than later.
Sacrifice zones are real. These are real communities that are being sacrificed. Blue lining is real. Water consumption is huge. And, I've heard people say, well, the water didn't go anywhere. Yeah, but they have to treat that water with a lot of chemicals in order for it to be used to cool data centers. And you cannot drink that water. So there's all kinds of strains on resources because of data centers. And I just think we just have to morally ask ourselves, like, where do we draw the line? How much do we really want to replicate human cognition? And that's where this is not a new topic. This has been going on since the days of John von Neumann, when he tried to talk about the brain in terms of zeros and ones. So this is not a new concept. It's been going on for a while.
Interesting. Yeah, thanks for sharing your thoughts on that, Frank and Dorothy. Another question that came in through the chat, someone shared a study where basically the result of the study was the competence penalty. So the fact that people are considered less competent when using AI, but it's a greater penalty for women than it is for men. So how do we deal with that as female actuaries as we consider if or when to use AI assistants or other generative AI? And I'll just open this up if anyone wants to jump in.
So I'll jump on this because this is one of the things that I actually make my students every week write. I give them the option of applying like the cognitive theories that we talk about to an AI topic. I give them an AI topic. So last week it was like, how is TikTok impacting attention? And we are finding, and I also have one on generative AI. How is large language models impacting cognition? And what we're finding is that the heavy reliance on large language models is contributing to something called cognitive decline. I was just at the American Psychological Association's annual meeting where neuroscientists talked about how large language models are impacting the most important Brodmann areas of the brain. So the brain has been divided into 52 Brodmann areas. And so, and it's having an adverse effect on like the 5 most important areas, Brodmann areas that are connected to executive functions of the brain. So that's pretty serious, I would think. And what I did like about her presentation is she talked about, well, how would we design these models differently to not have such an adverse impact? And I like the example she gave. She says, well, what if you had a large language model responded to your request for some research and said something like, well, have you tried to look this up yourself? I mean, so I think we have to start thinking about like, how should we be designing some of this stuff so as to not have such a huge impact on cognitive functions as well. It doesn't make sense for the machines to get smarter and the people to get dumber. That just doesn't make sense. I don't think that's a great future prospect for us all, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's a great take, Dorothy. And I'll give a little bit of a different lens on it as someone who's really encouraging use with my team and sort of utilizing it pretty actively. I'll say that the competency gap is a real and deeply frustrating dynamic. I guess it's not necessarily surprising to those of us who've navigated perception gaps in technical spaces before. You know, I was the only female computer science major from undergrad when I graduated with my major, so I feel this one really deeply. And I think there is kind of this double bind happening now, where we're encouraged to use AI to be more efficient and be more innovative, but then we're penalized when it's seen as doing the work for us rather than with us. And you know, the studies do show that it's more acute for women, especially in technical fields. I guess as I talk to my team about this, I encourage them that the way forward isn't just to avoid the tools, it's really to own the narrative around how we're using them and be transparent about the process and emphasize the judgment that you're using and articulate the value. So even, you know, an example in my presentation was I didn't put up those images and pretend that AI didn't make them. I was transparent in my process of how I did that. And I literally put it on the slides to own the narrative that, like, this is, you know, a little bit jokey and bringing a little bit of humor to it, but I'm doing it with intentionality, and I'm not kind of trying to slide it by as my own work or sort of avoid it. So I do think that the organizational support around this is really important. You know, Society of Actuaries has been incredibly supportive throughout this and working through it. But, you know, calling out those perception biases when we see them, you know, at the end of the day, using AI well is a skill, and we have to treat it that way. So, you know, it's all part of how you do work. And, you know, bias in competence isn't just a tech problem. It's not just an AI problem. It's kind of a leadership problem more broadly, but it isn't something where I would say just avoid using the tools and, you know, don't do it because you don't want to be perceived in a certain way. So that would be sort of my take on that article.
That's interesting. Thanks, Alice. I think we might have time for one more question. We'll see how quickly we get through this one. But Frank, I'll start with you on this. The question is about actuaries and data scientists and how they're kind of competing against one another on AI. So from your perspective, what would give actuaries the edge?
Yeah, I think so I manage both actuaries and data scientists. I think the actuaries are actually a lot more curious as to how they could use AI in their flows. They've gotten a working group going. So I think that intellectual curiosity that we have of like trying to understand the unknown and trying to find what the boundaries are and how risky something is works to our advantage. I think the other thing is that, you know, some of these AI tools do level the playing field. I do have some actuaries who are not as proficient coders as the data scientists, but they don't need to be, because you have a lot of AI out there that generates the code for you. You just need to do the editing and make sure you carry it across. And so they're using AI to manage their repos as well. So I do think that actuaries who are enabled with AI or are working with it have as good a shot as a data scientist working on more technical things.
Interesting. Yeah. Dorothy, I know you had talked a little bit about this as well, just the fact that data scientists aren't regulated in the same ways as actuaries are. Do you have anything to add on this?
Yeah, so I mean, I really think that you know, we really should look at like how the quality of education for data science, like what is a good standard to expect? Because I don't think we have anything like that. I mean, you know, someone could take a 6-month Coursera course, for example, and then call themselves a data scientist. Is that really, you know, the standard that you want? I mean, and I know there was actually a group of people thinking of coming up with an organization for credentialing data scientists. I haven't heard lately where that is, but that I think that would be a worthwhile thing to do. It just comes down to, making sure, and even the GIO office, the General Accountability Office, put out a study a few years ago saying that it's concerned with data scientists, with that they don't understand insurance, they don't understand regulation, and they may not be giving any due considerations to some of the concerns of regulators. So, I think it's a tough question. I mean, you have the American Statistical Association, which is like one of the bigger associations for statisticians, but even with them, they don't really disbar members or anything like that. If you don't pay your dues, you're probably kicked out of the organization, but nothing really serious. And even if you look at their conduct policies, it's more like personal conduct, how they at meetings and stuff like that. So I don't know. I think it would be an interesting to see insurance companies, to understand better like what insurance companies think should be like the gold standard kind of background for a data scientist.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Thank you guys for your engagement today. That's all we have for you on the annual meeting and on this session. So I think I'm sharing my screen. Hold on, actually. Now I think I'm sharing my screen. Can you guys all see this slide? Okay, cool. Thanks for the heads up. So that's all we have for you today. We appreciate you joining us for this session and for the annual meeting as a whole. We hope you found today's sessions inspiring and educational, and we appreciate your ongoing engagement with NAWA and look forward to seeing those of you who are able join one of our 2 happy hours this evening. Thank you, everyone.